All right, everybody, we are back again. It's season 2.1 of the Coach's Compass, and we're talking everything life after ball now, right? So a whole little twist into this Coach's Compass, talking about retirement. Today, I have the pleasure of having with me Doherty and Tara, and you guys know them, love them. They've come on before. You've seen them on the Coach's Compass for the normal episodes, but now we're talking about retirement. And today, our focus is going to be how retirement affects family, relationships, and friendships. A huge part. That's a hard thing for us to overcome, especially us being athletes that now have the tag of former athlete and are fully retired. So ladies, when it comes to home life, where or how have you heard how former athletes are struggling with dealing with now having more time at home?
You want to start, Tara? Well, I'm probably going to tap into some of the obvious because both of you in here and the listeners would probably could recognize these things. But what I hear a lot is actually not only as a former player, it could be a retirement due to a title. Like you mentioned to begin with, it's not necessarily the title, but it could be in business as it could be in some kind of sport. But the thing is that we always connect ourselves so much with the actual identity of being. So the being part of it is a huge thing. So all of a sudden you take kind of a bit of that personality out of it. And even if you're with a partner and you're with your family, they have always seen you like that. So who are you showing up as right now in front of your kids and in front of your wife or your husband? So there's a lot of things about finding that new part of yourself. And when I actually work with either of those categories in getting into that next chapter, it's mainly to find that new being rather than the new title. Because you mentioned as well, title is an external motivational driver for a lot of people, and usually those are very similar to younger people. But then the more we age, the more the intrinsic motivation drivers is actually something that drives us, and that is actually what does it feel like to have this identity. So just by understanding that now you're missing these feelings, which could be, I feel sense of belonging, I feel part of a community, I feel proud of my performance or whatever it is. So all of a sudden, I feel everything is taken away from me. So that, of course, accumulates a lot of frustration from both those people around that, which is the community, the social being and surroundings, because all of a sudden we have to again look at you in a different way. And how do you want to feel in this new role as not having the same identity? So there's a lot of things about the being and the identity more than actually the title that I hear from people. You want to go, Tara?
So the journey and the difficulty of the journey behind the scenes as an athlete while we were in the sport, and just already questioning some of the friendships that were there. Like, hey, are these people there because they really like me and care about me? Are they really friends of our family? Do they really have our best interest at heart? Do they really care about our son? All of those things, like, it's an environment while you're in it that as people know, like, just you're not really sure. It's super exciting, super fun, super whatever, but is it authentic? Is it real? Do they care about you? So you're already questioning the authenticity of folks while you're in it. The pressure to perform and just try to be great as it is while you're playing, and while wondering your social life and work and where it's going to go after, to suddenly you are done, and sometimes your worst fears are realized these folks are not really there for you. You're also grappling with that loss of, hey, this was my community that I really tried to believe in, to now they're not really my community anymore. So I am in the game, like, I've lost this huge exciting part of my life, but I'm not sure that the relationships I ever had were there. These people took off and I don't talk to them anymore, and so I've got to face my family. Do I like my family? I'm not sure. Maybe they're not. Mowing the lawn and doing laundry and babysitting and all this stuff is maybe it's wonderful on the one hand, but it's not as exciting as me getting to hang out with this massive group of guys all the time and, basically play with my friends. I don't mean that like you're actually playing ball with your friends, but there's like this camaraderie and whatnot. But now I'm faced with, I don't know where those friends have gone, and I don't know who I am, and now I've got to face normal life, and it just feels like a massive smack in the face. So I'm not sure that's everybody's journey, but that's how our journey was, and we thought we understood it. I had worked in it, I understood what it was like for other athletes. I'd been helping them train to be that way, and helping with the training after the fact, like how do you come down from that body to a new body. The particular case that I was dealing with, it was over 300 pounds, trying to get a whole bunch of weight off because they were playing as a over 300 pound offensive lineman. But so there's that physical shock of like I got to train differently now too. Now I'm faced with what was that? Was that even real? That was our experience, and I would say that in chatting with a lot of other people, that's their experience too. And so you've got to navigate that enormous amount of pressure and change, memory, a challenge, and a lot to that journey.
Yeah,
How did
I
you
know.
feel? How do you feel, Coop? I feel curious
Yeah,
about your
I
situation.
think you guys lead it into a great topic of just like community, right? I mean, a lot of people ask me, do I miss the game? And majority of the time, even a lot of former athletes I speak to, when I ask if you missed the game, it's never the game that we actually miss, because the game was the game. Like, we did so much preparation leading up to it. It was fun. Like, if you won, you lost, like, you still went out there and played. The part that we missed the most is the locker room, right? Like, that was our place. That was our place of just bonding. That was our place of peace. That was, and like you said, that was our place of friendships, right? You can be big kids in the locker room and nobody really understands what goes on inside of there unless you're a part of it. And then when we go outside, and now we're former athletes, and now, we're with our families a lot. We're with our friends, our friends that were like friends outside of the locker room, but nothing can like compete with what we had inside the locker room. And I guess my next question with you guys is how do families, friends, the community kind of set up that community for the former athletes to kind of help them transition into this new role of life? Because I think it's very hard to replicate the locker room. I mean, I'm lucky to be in a situation to where I work in a gym, right? So I'm around athletes all the time. I'm around coaches that were former athletes. So understand. So we kind of build that camaraderie and that bond of being in the gym. And it's almost like, for me, the locker room. But for other guys, they don't necessarily have that. Sometimes they go into an office job, right? And they're working at a desk, and you're working for yourself, right? Sometimes you communicate with other people, or sometimes people are working from home, or you go into real estate, whatever it may be. They don't have that same community and locker room feel, and they're trying to replicate it, but it's so hard to find. Like Terry, you said, like, sometimes you question, like, were the friends that I had then, like, are they my friends now, or are they around for the right reasons? And sometimes you don't hear from them as much now. Like, you're so used to going into the locker room every day and being able to speak to people, and you're around people all the time. So now it's like, shoot, like, I'm with my family every day, and then like I go to my office or I go to my job, and like sometimes that's not the same vibe. And I can't joke with them the same way. Like, you don't have the same locker room games where we shoot a paper ball into a trash can, or you're playing ping pong or whatever, or you have the same traditions of like the rookies or the freshmen that are coming in, that you're throwing them in the cold tub, or they have to go get you snacks and stuff. Like, it's a completely different world out here for us. And we just, like Tara, we talked about a little bit earlier, like, we're giant kids. And we're so used to just continuing to be giant kids that now we go into the real world and people are adults. And I'm still trying to figure out how to be an adult. I think I'm getting okay at it, but like, there's still the sign of, even having a daughter, right? Like, how do we balance that out? So I think it leads into like, how does our life outside of our sport build a community that helps us transition?
I could speak to, I'm laughing because the things that used to, so it's a huge question. That's the one thing I've continually heard from every player that I've ever worked with is like, we can't replicate that camaraderie, that silliness, that whatever. I mean, you're like in your 30s playing Mario Kart, all the other things, that the shenanigans go on in the locker room, that create a lot of joy, and a lot of families don't understand that. okay, time to stop being this kid. You got to be like a grown up now, like do grown up things. And I enjoyed like the silliness of my husband and his friends. Like that was sort of part of our world as well, but it didn't translate normally into regular job. And case in point, what I was laughing at was my ex-husband went to work in the oil patch and went into sales partway through the game, like while he was playing. Like, there's a handful of them that got an opportunity to do sales in the oil patch, and we used to have talks like, hey, you can't say that to people. Like when you go to the office, like you're gonna so hurt someone's feelings because of the amount of like jabbing and like poking fun at each other that he would do. Like he'd also do that with my son. I'm like, our son's gonna have a problem when he gets older if he won't stop picking on him like this. Like you can't say those things. Like dads don't say those things. But I remember him his first. I don't know. I don't know if it's exactly changed, but he went to work with a couple of his teammates. So one of the things they did do is they sort of assembled a handful of them. I believe, were contacted by some folks to say like, hey, we can pave the way for you to have a life after sport and leverage your if there was any degree of celebrity, your acumen was speaking in front of a camera to getting into sales or something like that, because you big personalities, you learned and you honed those media skills, you understood how to speak for your team and be good ambassadors for your team, you be a great salesperson. So sales seemed like an avenue for some, and there were some organizations where we're from that paved the way for some athletes to come and be spokespeople for them in some way, shape, or form. And that helped, that leveraged the celebrity. So the celebrity or the feeling of that, maybe, whether people want to admit that or not, like it's exciting to have people give you attention. Sometimes that attention is not great when you're playing, but there's maybe something positive that can come from that journey of leadership and camaraderie and building a team. So they were, this group of guys were invited to sort of help build teams or help with the teamwork within their organizations as part of the sales force. And so there was what seemed to be a deliberate intention to engage players before they retired to be a part, to leverage those great attributes for another productive job outside of football. So they did that, but those same guys were pulling pranks in the office. That's why I was laughing, because I remember hearing that like half the day was spent, like they were online creating license plates, stickers that they were putting over some of the people that worked there, like their license plates. They were in the parkade, like horrible things on their license plates, and letting these guys that they're working with drive around for like maybe one guy went for 2 weeks with this license plate that said something really really not good. Stupid tricks like calling people into the office, Bob, I need to see you, water on, like a cup of water on
Sure.
their heads as they're coming in, like that old, like, in the door, water falls in your head, like, like they're 5, pulling those pranks. But that's what they used to. Over like a lead wreck, like in the office, there's people mad, there were feelings, like there was an actual socialization issue. Like, you can't act like this in an office. Like people are not pulling pranks on each other, but they were pulling pranks and they were having a great time. Now, did that have a carryover effect? Did some people start getting involved in it? They actually improved the team culture, but there was a socialization issue as well that was apparent around how do you carry yourself outside of a locker room? What does life look like? Can you carry yourself and not be a little kid playing pranks on people the entire day at the office? Like, can you get real work done? And I'm not saying that they weren't doing a good job, but there was just another piece that was identified in terms of this was the socialization into the quote unquote real world. And that real world seemed like a big dull bore to a bunch of them. So that was an adjustment, and something that we personally had to navigate as a family. But it also came with a physiological cost, which I can speak to later, just in terms of like how that affected health and coupled with the lack of training volume and whatnot. There's some things to navigate there for sure that happy to talk about. But I'll pass the torch over to you guys to comment.
So I actually always look at it as closing chapters, because again, when you actually do look objectively on a lifespan, then we have chapters, and as a player or as an athlete, that is obviously something that has been taken up the most of the life until the career ends. So of course that's going to be hard, because it's like ending a relationship. You're ending a relationship with that huge chapter. First of all, what I usually would have the conversation with the individual, which is also another thing. I always tell them that your journey from here is your journey. And what fuels you and what drives you is completely yours. So it's also about acceptance that now we are actually closing that chapter. That chapter is over. It doesn't mean that, nothing can be good ever again, but then you pull away all the things. So what was it you found joy in? How can you find that in other surroundings, in other environments? Because maybe 80% like the locker room, all the energy, being a kid, fooling around, pranking each other and all that. Obviously, like you said, Tara, you cannot bring that everywhere, but it doesn't mean that you never will have it again, because I think the beauty about it is also accepting that was actually something really good for me. It made me feel good, it was part of something, and we can joke around with each other. So where can I do that still? Yeah, well, meet up with some guys sometimes, and then you can be kids and be foolish and all that, because it's not like you have to close it just because it's not the chapter in your life anymore. So when I have these dialogue with my clients in these situations, it's really about pulling out all the good things, because you also mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily the game. No, you could always go around play ball with some kids. So I mean, you could easily get into that if you wanted to, but it's more what you had going through all these struggles together. That bonding is so unique. So what feelings did that ignite in me? But obviously it was probably something usually about the social part, belonging, being part of something with somebody else. So where else can you do that? And even though it might not be the same recipe, it can still be something similar, maybe in a smaller setting or maybe in a different environment, but it's still about being aware of what kind of feelings did that give me, so I can turn those on again. And it's actually interesting, because I have kind of like the image of, it's a little bit like repeating the first real, like our, what's it called? Like when we had the first relationship and we were in love, the butterflies and all that. And when we tried to look for that again, but maybe you can't find the same thing again. And that's also okay. So it's about accepting that I can still find something that's really good with my new chapter I'm going towards, but I have to build it and create it on my own, because now my journey is going to be as an adult by myself, and I have to create it. It's not being put to me anymore, which is obviously super hard. But what I also hear from some athletes is that maybe they have actually been not necessarily a celebrity, but if they have been the guy or the girl, if that's the case, that has a certain level of performance, then outside people expect the same, what's it called, to become something. You'll be great at this as well, or maybe you'll be a great leader, or maybe you'll be that. So that expectations from the external can be sometimes so hard to live up to, because maybe some people are actually really fed up with always having to prove a lot of things in order for them to be at this level. And that's even also another thing, by communicating that out and then stand by it, that I'm no longer interested in proving myself and being the best and, be so hard on myself anymore. I actually just want to be a normal person, having a nice life, and be happy with that. So I feel like there's a lot of things where just by getting into the information about what will this next chapter bring to me, how do I want to feel, because that's actually the driver for us in any sense. So what can I bring from that? No, we cannot bring that locker room. That was for that age as well. So as we mature, things will change naturally. You will become a dad. You will have a responsibility, and you can probably still joke around with your kids, but like you said, Tara, there will also be some limits of how much you can bring to your kids from what you did in that locker room. Yeah.
Stuff as trauma. We had to teach our son like how to not treat other people as well, because he's just thinking everybody all the time. And every parent teacher interview was a delight. I'd always hear some new thing that my son had done that he largely probably learned from his dad. But yeah, I hear you. I think the work, to answer your question a bit differently, it starts in the game. The athletes that I work with that have been the very best also have a lot of, what's the word, is it metacognition? They know themselves really well. They get to know themselves really well to perform well. So, and they have to be able to train and get the results that they have to figure that out. Like you've got your formula, you understand, you learn to trust what your body can tolerate, what you mentally tolerate in the game. And those are incredible attributes that very few people get to develop. Who gets to learn, push themselves that hard and go through adversity and be, under the spotlight for that long. Like that is a really rare opportunity. And so there's something really awesome in that I think needs to be quickly identified and sort of celebrated while you're in it, which I don't think gets celebrated enough, but that's something that we sort of, I've tried to harness when I'm doing either like training consults or figuring out why someone's not adapting to training or whatever, is trying to look at where someone's gone off the rails from that particular thing that they know, and because competition, like I'm going with this, is competition doesn't wait for you. You have to perform anyway. You gotta show up anyway, and sometimes you're going to be in optimal shape, and I'd say probably 9 times out of 10 you're not. You're pretty battered when you go out, show up on that field, but people that are helping you help you kind of do it anyway and as safely as possible. So it's kind of, I reframe some things with athletes that have come out of sport, and either they want to still be in that same kind of shape and they may be looking for talent transfer opportunities, like they might go into sliding sports, which is something I've been involved with a lot of the last couple of years in particular. So they don't want to completely give up on themselves as athletes. They want at least the door open to something, or at least being a heck of a rack hockey player or something after the game. So they want to maintain that training. But where am I going with this? Identifying and harnessing that I can compete on demand. I can rally and figure things out really, really quickly, because I've lived in this chaotic game for a really long time, and I know how to pull things together. So identify that early. Start having conversations with people before they retire, to say, all right, so you like this, you live this, you've been in this for a long time. Like, what are those things that really get you going? Let's leverage those abilities and look for opportunities outside right away that will afford you at least the use of some of those. And let's celebrate those and really emphasize that you can perform on demand, how resilient and gritty you are, how versatile you are, dynamic you are. And then if you're suddenly just going to sit, behind a counter and serve customers, like maybe that would offer the same, level of excitement, because I'm not sure, there's chaos everywhere, but the leadership abilities in that need to be leveraged and celebrated, and I'd say harnessed right away. And also discussions with family members, like, you married this dude that does this for a living, and this is what this looks like. Do you know this? This is what this looks like. A lot of wives, significant others, don't know anything about what goes on in that locker room and really who their husband is, because they usually, I found that so many people don't know and never really knew how they retired, and then they're like, oh my gosh, like, what's wrong with you? Like, what's missing? Well, this huge part of my life is missing. And so educate your family beforehand to say, this is what to expect, and you can't just turn that off. Like, this person is also probably an adrenaline junkie, and and there's a big dopamine hit that comes with playing those games. Like, you just suddenly saying, all right, now here's all the chores. Start being normal dad. I've been waiting on you for a long time because you've been off doing this, and now I'm going to go pursue my career, and now I'm going to go out and do all these things, and here suddenly you take over and switch roles with me. Like, that's going to go over like a lead brick and cause a lot of friction in relationships. That pre-education is super critical, and also just like some help and support to figure out, like, where would those qualities best serve, and is there a way to still stay involved with the game? And I know there's all to that end, though, some folks want to get far away from the game because it's just brings up too many memories. It's too emotional. Like, you want to be there, so you may need an actual break from that. But I think recognizing why you do the game in the first place and what you're getting out of it, and then how you can replicate that in the real world is really, really important. Because also from a physiological perspective, your body can't go from this to this all of a sudden. I've witnessed a lot of health consequences from not maintaining some level of the training, the physiological flux that goes on when someone suddenly is training all the time to suddenly sitting there. Like, it's a massive shock to the system and comes with its own consequences. That pre-planning is really critical, and I don't know that anybody really does that, because the shock to the family and friends after of like, hey, I don't like lots of marriages, as I mentioned in the last time I spoke. Like, there was a pretty staggering statistic of retirement from sport. Like 83% of marriages in the NHL were shown a number of years ago that don't make it a year after, because they just can't handle that change, and they recognize that maybe know the person they're married to the same way and weren't equipped to help them through this transition, or put unrealistic expectations on them to be something that they're not, or not ready to be, or maybe can't ever be once they retire, and don't know how to fill that void of competing for that big ring or that Olympic medal or whatever it is. Like, there's a void there, and often the families don't know how to fill that, and they don't survive. So it's got to be more intentional planning inside that bubble, and help and support to transfer these incredible folks into something that will harness how, what they're best at.
But also, like you said, Tara, sorry to interrupt you, but they have actually developed, the players or the athlete have developed so many unique skills that they probably wouldn't have been able to in normal circumstances. However, what I also experienced is that usually it's more like dictating development, which means that they're not used to being proactive. And that proactive part is suddenly something like, wait, I'm used to somebody just telling me to do this and that and perform at this level. And then I'm just, grinding on with it. But then on the contrary, all of a sudden now I have to be proactive. Now I have to ask myself, what do I feel like doing? What strength from all this can I go out and use for something else? So there's a big shift in that, which is obviously, like you say, that requires some consultation for them to get the help, the counseling to actually to transfer those skills to a different area for them to actually be able to go this path, because it's super complicated, even though they have so much built in already. What do you think?
How do you pre-educate athletes that, our plan is only just to play? Like, we don't really like to think that there's actually life after our sport, because we're in it at the time. Like, you get a guy that's year one, they automatically assume like, hey, I'm probably going to be in this for 10, 20 years. Even if I think back to my career, like thinking, hey, I started playing football when I was 5, and I just now retired at 32. So all I've known is really the locker room and the coaches that I've dealt with, the training that I've done, the relationships I've built up through that. Like, how do you get guys to understand that there is life after, or females, how there's life after your sport, and then also like helping them understand how to socialize? Because I know you guys talked about it, but like our dialogue in the locker room, like the words that we use and stuff, wouldn't be accepted. Like, a lot of us would be canceled nowadays. I just think of the words that like we use in the locker room, the stuff that we called each other, like, and you talk about the pranks that you pulled, like they pulled, and like how your husband would communicate with with your son. And I think about it now, like I get in trouble a lot for myself. Like, I call my daughter sometimes, like when she's crying too much, I'll be like, hey, you're a crybaby, like stop that. And like those words can have a meaning later on and can hurt her in the long run. But me being who I am, like that, shoot, my dad called me a crybaby. And then like I hear that throughout football, and like all the other words I heard, and like now I'm thinking back on it and I'm like, well, it doesn't really, like, I feel great about like who I am. Like, it helped me become a strong person. Like, it helped me in the work world that I'm in now, and like it's helped me continue to be competitive and like not show those sides of emotion. But then, like you said, the real world, like whatever you want to call it, now is kind of dull to us. Like, people are kind of walking on eggshells and kind of thinking of the words that they have to say. Like, when you're in the locker room, whatever you want to say, it just flies. You just say it. It comes to mind, you just say it. because we know that, hey, regardless, we're going to step on the field. We're going to work out, we're going to work out together. We're going to practice together. We're going to play together. Cool. Whatever is said in the locker room is said in the locker room. It doesn't leave there. And a lot of families, like you said, don't know what goes on in the locker room. And I think a lot of athletes tend to date other athletes because they have the familiarity, like they know what's going on in it. But then when you're an athlete and then you date somebody that's not an athlete and they just show up to the games and they hear about your practice and stuff, they don't know what goes on in the locker room. It becomes tough because then, like I said, the words we say can be very, very harmful. But to us, that's normal. So how do we help guys understand that I guess the hardest question is, like, how do you understand that the real world isn't equipped to handle what we are used to in the locker room? That's just how I look at it. Like, we say nowadays that society is getting a little softer, but in the locker room is tough. The locker room is a hard place to be at. If you don't have the strength to be in there, you are going to be eaten alive. Now when we flip it over and we go into the real world, we get eaten alive because how we talk doesn't match up. So how do we find the balance in there?
But I would like to actually challenge you on that one, because it's a little bit like people that haven't been having a whole career as a professional athlete, or even just, like you mentioned, from 5 years to 32, you have only been focusing on football. But actually, when you think about it, at least I can remember that as a kid as well. I was reading this big book. It was like a physical book back then. And they're like, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I just remember, like, oh my God, there's so many options out there. How do I pick something? But I actually love that. I mean, even when I was kind of already decided what way I wanted to develop myself, I was still curious because there's so many doors to open that I haven't had the opportunity to go into. So what would it take for you to maybe have the curious perspective of your new path?
I think for me, I knew very early on that sports aren't forever, right? That's just me looking at the trajectory of how long athletes last. Like, there's very few people that make it to how long Tom Brady makes, or Aaron Rodgers, or some of those top guys that go all the way to their 40s, right? But I knew that there was life after it. So I kind of started preparing myself on doing other things. Like, so I started coaching very early on when I was already playing. And I started that when I first came to Denmark. And it wasn't like something that I had planned for, but it was something that was kind of thrown at me. So I was like, hey, let me venture into this. So I started seeing the other side. And then I had a little 2-year gap in there where I came back to the States and I started working at the gym that I work at now, where I kind of had the opportunity to be a leader and develop a team, do the sales side of things, and kind of saw, like, hey, like, this is actually, I enjoy this, or this is something else I would do after football is done. Also had a lot of other ventures in there where I was a door-to-door salesman. I worked at Walmart selling cable and internet in Miami, where you had to stop people and actually talk to them. Right. So I tried a lot of different things in between there, whereas those opportunities weren't given to me when I was in college. Like, so in the college world, right, you don't really get much time. Like, we can't do internships. You can't do study abroad or anything like that, because I was football and track. So like both my seasons were filled. So then when I got into kind of the professional athlete world, I had more time to kind of see things. There's also a lot of athletes that I would say do investments. That's another good thing. You have a lot of guys that kind of go into the real estate, like sales side of things, just because we end up being good talkers, because we had to talk in front of the media. We've had to sell ourselves to teams on who we are. So I think for guys that kind of know that sports aren't forever, they start to venture into other things. Like you said, reading books and seeing what you actually wanted to be when you grow up. For me, when I was growing up, I knew I wanted to be a professional athlete. Okay. But there's other parts like that I wanted to do too. Like, one time I wanted to study economics. Math ain't for me. As we can see, I suck with the timings of things. It's not for me all the time, right? Too many different time zones. But then I started realizing that who I am can help other athletes. And again, that's why the podcast came about. So I think finding other things that excite you, entertain you, and that you're passionate about outside of your sport kind of helps athletes outside of retirement. You see the ones that do well outside of retirement usually have a plan B. And that's the hardest part, because a lot of us are told when you go into your sport is your sport, plan A. Like, even when we go into college, I was told that you're a student athlete, right? So that meant that student was second to us, athlete was first. And that we weren't signing up to go to school. We were signing up to play the sport for the school. because that's the driving the money, and that's going to help you get to the next level. So I think it's defining the balance on the two, and then realizing that you can have other passions outside of, you know, just your sport. You can work just as hard at your sport and train for it and get ready for the games and everything. But you can also, I know a lot of guys aren't, what do they say? We don't have a lot of talent of being able to navigate multiple different things at the same time, but we can. Like, it's just what you put your mind to. So I think that challenge of that helps.
I think there's a lot of things, I mean, probably I misbelieve about that. Now I'm this, then I also cannot, you know, master how I speak, master these different roles, because at the end of the day, well, when you have to do something, you will adapt and you will learn it. So just like yourself, I mean, you're pretty good at being, you know, being formal when you speak. It's not like you're cursing or using all weird stuff. So you put yourself in. So now I'm a podcaster, now I'm doing this, and I have a normal communication. Then when you turn around after this podcast and when you're with the guys in the locker room, all of a sudden you switch over. And I think that's actually the beauty about mastering the different roles, because you also then learn that it's okay to have more than one role. It doesn't mean that the old one dies. It just means that I'm using it whenever it feels optimal or it feels right in the situation to do it.
I've been sitting here listening to a bit of a different perspective that just came into my brain. Is just to go back on a comment you made about like the way we talk to each other in the locker room, and then we have to come out and talk another way. I've paid a lot of attention over the years to what makes people perform, and kind of performance is in my mind a universal construct, because understanding sort of physiologically what goes on in the body to become a great football player is no different than to be a great accountant or to a great violinist or whatever. It's all actually physiologically the same. And so the things that cause people to fall into compromise health-wise, the biggest thing when I've kind of done like, you know, key performance indicators for making plans for athletes and monitoring physiological readiness, making sure they can show up on the field well or the track or wherever they're going. It often, when we've even got an incredible training plan, great nutrition, all the stuff is in line. Biggest thing that causes the biggest physiological, I guess, sinkhole is not living honestly, strangely, like social, you're not having good social support, but not being authentic. And so oftentimes when I've been called in, because that is what I do a lot now, is get called into situations where athletes are not adapting on time, they're not performing well, coach will call, say, what's wrong with this athlete, or I'm flatlined or whatever. 9 times out of 10, I mean, they're managing a whole bunch of stress, but when you know, there's some things we can do to kind of jimmy their physiology to get them to still perform. But a lot of times it comes down to I'm not being me in this situation. I'm not being this. I don't have the support. I don't feel like I can be me. I don't know who I am in this game. And that seems to be the hugest pressure and source of stress, which causes them to fall into disrepair, you know, starting to put on weight, soft muscle, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, one of the things I think that we fail athletes at is I think that they get to be themselves in the locker room. They get to truly be them. And then they go outside and they have to put on this other persona. In my mind, that may be part of the problem. And so a lot of people say, I can't be myself. I can't say what I want to say. I can't do what I want to do. At least with these guys, I could be me in the locker room, even though I did say earlier, like, are these friendships real? But guys are at least trying to be who they are and aren't afraid to speak up. That's a big issue when they leave. And so that's, I say I'd have that problem as well. I've struggled in certain jobs because I grew up in the world where I was always around this. And so I've gone into other domains, worked in clinical settings and whatever, when I've suddenly just spoken up and they're like, Terry, you can't say that stuff. I'm like, but it's the truth. like, and moreover, you're asking me to assess health issues, and by, you know, these people are getting sick because they're not able to be them. So there's another thing going on, and so we're training people, you have to be normal, but no, I'm starting to wonder if we've got it backwards sometimes. Like, and so I think I'm echoing back to some of the stuff I heard my husband say, and many other people say, that they're like, I can't do the BS. I can't be the fake person that just shows up and is nice to people all the time. I can't be that person. Like, I can't go out there in that job and shake hands and glad hand everyone. Like, you really did that as players, but I don't have a place where I can just be me. And then they come home and they feel like maybe they can't be be there. And maybe they didn't know that they couldn't be themselves there because they were, I mean, they're training so hard, they're so darn tired, they probably don't know any better. So they just kind of go through the motions. There is, I think, a lot of folks that have struggled and haven't recovered well and bounced into something productive after sport is because they haven't found a place where they really feel like safe to be that. And they've bounced from relationship to relationship, they've bounced from job to job, and they haven't felt like they've anchored themselves to something that is truthful. And now we're in a culture right now where things you can't say very much. It just all feels like it's fake. So again, reality is challenged. Where is real? Like I was talking about in this magical bubble, that I'm starting to wonder if the bubble is partly, to perform well, you have to be dialed into who you are. You have to. And if you're not, that has a cost to it in terms of performance, physiologically, other. So I think, I don't know what I think now. I just had that thought. I don't know what I think, but I recognize that that's a huge problem for folks, and so they drift off and say, well, I can't be who I am. So they live this sort of a bit of an imposter life after the fact. To your earlier point, like, what do we do? I think that self-awareness, like you don't want to be thinking about the future. All you know is this environment and that you want to stay in it. Awareness of that is something unto itself. Like, this is where I feel best. This is what I love to do. And that doesn't have to change. Like, crying out loud, I just was reading again about this 101-year-old hurdler who, I mean, he competes in the Masters games. There's people that still don't stop being an athlete. Everybody, and you want to continue to create opportunities for yourself to still perform well. Like, that is really, really important. You don't want to shut that door and shut this down. Like, it's a huge part of who you are, and that identity, maybe doesn't have to be challenged as much as we think it does. I just don't know what that looks like exactly. So anyways.
Which is probably also individual at the end of the day.
Pardon me?
Yeah, I said, which is probably also individual at the end of the day, how much challenge the individual needs or wants afterwards. But I also think that there's a part of this topic that is still a little bit taboo when you talk about that as an ex-player, like a former player, that you don't want to go out and say that you're actually struggling with these things. There's a lot of things in the male dominated. We actually talked about this earlier on another podcast too. But I feel like there's still a lot of really closed, or maybe we just don't want to speak openly about that. Men actually also have emotions. Men actually also have frustrations. You might be the toughest player when you play, but that doesn't mean that you will face the real life experiences like everybody else. And yeah, it's going to be hard because all of a sudden you have to find that role in it, and it will accumulate a lot of frustration to be in trying to reinvent yourself. But I think just by doing this podcast is actually, let's be open about this. Is not just one, but also what I hear when I speak to athletes is they usually get surprised when they hear other athletes are actually struggling with the same doubts or fear or lack of confidence. They're like, really? I thought it was only me. How can you think it's only you? And I think it's the same thing after the aftermath about it is also about, oh wait, you're frustrated about it as well. Oh God, I thought it was only me. So I feel like men tend to just isolate themselves with whatever worry or frustration they have. And just by being open about it, hopefully that would also make more people seek help.
Well, I would say we need to hear from you because, like, you're the expert. Like, honestly,
Yeah.
like, my job is to help kind of people train to be that way, and then how to come out of it and train effectively and navigate things so they can either move on to another sport or keep going. That's kind of how I live in this world, but have recognized so much about how the emotional, and then I've had the personal experience of actually living it as well and seeing the cost of that and not making it out the other side. As much as I thought I understood what would happen and how I could be in it, it didn't prepare me for the change that would happen in our family. And we still didn't make it. We tried really hard, but there's still some things I would have done differently as much as I could have. So it's almost like identifying, like, what do you need? So I guess it's a really important thing for us it's like I wanted to hear from you is what do you think you need? And yeah, that may be different from every person to person, but
And I think the hardest part is just and I think this leads us perfectly into our next episode that we'll have is that what do we do with all that energy, that anger, that frustration, how to politic? Because we dealt with it when we were in the locker room, we dealt with it when we were, dealing with coaches and trying to get onto other teams, like having to shake hands and show a face and be this smiley guy. But then when you get in the locker room, you're able to like let out who you are, right? But then when the sport is over, right, especially for us combat sport athletes, that football, rugby, MMA, boxing, whatever it may be, that is a very contact sport, we no longer have that legal violence. And Tara, we talked about this before. Like, we're so used to being trained as, you can kind of say, like modern day gladiators, right? We're going into a ring, into an arena, whatever it may be, to go ahead and knock heads with another human being, right? As violently as you want to be. So any anger, any frustration, anything you've dealt with from the outside world, you now can take it out on the field. But when it's taken away from us, what do we do next? Like, what do we have to use to leverage that anger and use it to our advantage? Because when you do play in the field angry, or if you're playing happy, but you still love violence, whatever it may be, like that plays to our advantage. But now you go into what we call the real world, that we say, sometimes that anger and that violence can't be turned to anything else. And sometimes it's turned into the negative way, right? Like we say about, like for me, like I harness a lot of my anger and my frustration to use it in a competitive way for my sales, right? Like I go into every day thinking like, okay, well, this is the number that I hit yesterday, what I hit last month. All right, I'm competing with that number that I'm trying to do for the gym now. Now I'm trying to help this coach get to this many PTs or whatever it may be. And I get frustrated with myself if I don't hit those numbers, but then I think about, okay, how do I harness that and use it for the next day, right? A lot of guys don't have that outlet, right? Some guys like still want to physically be violent. I don't have that tendency, right? I just go lift weights, right? I can go lift heavy, drop it, boom, cool, throw a med ball, whatever it may be. Some people want to go out there and physically just punch somebody or tackle somebody. And Terry, we said last time, like, you can't just walk down the sidewalk and tackle somebody. Otherwise, the cops are being called quickly and somebody's putting you in a mental institute. So I think that leads us into our next episode that we do, talking about what do we do with all this anger, this frustration, this legal violence that we no longer have, and this energy that we have pent up, to where does it go now? Like, how do we leverage it? How do we use it to our advantage and be able to harness that in and do good with it?
Although, look forward to that.
Yeah, it'll be a good one.
well, I guess, and big thing too is, like having dealt with the other side of sport, and in Canada, like very involved with some safe sport issues, like which is why I took on the role I did at Boston Canada Skeleton, was around sort of a lot of like aggressive behaviors, and that's a sport where you have to be super aggressive and it breeds aggression, and that's another thing that we have to talk about from a physiological perspective. Like when you train that way, it actually creates hormonally some of those responses. Some of it will go away, but there's also sometimes some root, like sometimes it doesn't for a while, and so you need an outlet for that. And so there's some things you can figure out physiologically what's going on with that person to create that response. So there is some of it is a hormonal thing that we can talk about, that's like maybe dry and dusty and boring and no one wants to talk about that, but it's a real thing. We do need to actually deal with it, because there's things you can do to come off of that so that you're healthy and you're not going around with this unmanaged sort of situation. Just like it's just like diabetes. Like you wouldn't not manage your diabetes. There's some things you need to do physiologically to manage that. So if no one's paying attention to that or understanding that, then it can become something that is more pervasive and a health consequence. So that is, as I mentioned, chatting with that doctor that I met from the NFL, like you said, like no one's who's dealing with that. So that is something that's of interest to me and something that can help others come down from. So there's that. But then over there may be some root issues around that no one sort of dealt with before. Like come from some tough past. Like I've met so many athletes, as I mentioned the last time, who if they weren't doing their sport, they may not be in a good place. Maybe they would be in jail. Maybe they would have committed crimes. Like there's something that's like they've come from some very challenging past, and sports saved their hides. Like if they didn't get into that sport and leverage that, do something productive with the anger and the hurt they were feeling, who knows where the heck that would land. And that's a scary part coming out of the sport where you had that and it was considered a healthy and productive outlet for that. Like you could just go, like pound on someone on the field and be super aggressive and get that out, and it caused a positive outcome. You had great, awesome blocks. You did these things, like you sacked the quarterback however many times. Like there was a productive outcome for that anger. But if you don't have a productive, like you said, a productive outcome from that anger, then you're left facing it. It's in your face. If we've dealt with it physiologically, then all of a sudden it's like, I got to do some deep diving into myself personally. Like, why was I so angry? Have I gotten over those issues from the past? And hopefully, if you're in a good coaching situation, have a really good, this is the responsibility of organizations. And that's where I had to take my career in the last little while, is understanding what is the responsibility of an organization from a governance perspective and bigger picture stuff, to create an environment where athletes are healthy and that they have healthy, safe cultures to promote them being great, outlets to discuss if they've got angers and potentially pervasively bad behaviors. Because 9 times out of 10, when I peek behind the curtain of people's lives, even when they're playing sport, they still haven't dealt with that anger altogether. And if they're training really, really hard and they've gone to a bad place, they're overreached or slipping into the territory of being overtrained, they're really angry anyway. And if no one's managing that, they're suddenly drinking too much, or maybe they start doing drugs, or maybe they started doing unhealthy, self-harming behaviors. And I've uncovered a lot of that in my career and helped successfully deal with it from a physiological perspective that helped them be in a more lucid state to make better decisions. But it's a quagmire of stuff to deal with. The organizations, we can talk about this from a big picture. Organizationally, organizations have to do a better job of managing that and dealing with it, and not just sort of focusing on paid gladiators and the bottom line. To great sports psych teams and physiological teams, like advisors, like somebody like myself that goes in there and says, hey, I'm recognizing that Bob's got more going on than Bob is showing, and if we don't deal with this is going to lead to injury or illness or something more pervasive. And so are we overtraining these folks so that they are and when they stop, they can't deal with what happens to the storm that's in them? There's so many layers to this. So good gracious, I'm creating more questions than answers, but I think there's obviously a call to action around organizations to recognize that they are responsible for these human beings and for the lifespan of their time, and they can't just toss them on the side of the road eventually, essentially, and be like, okay, thanks for your time, we're done with you, and now you're left in this A, physiological storm, B, oops, you don't have a place to deal with that anger, C, why am I angry? I'm still dealing with my childhood stuff and some things that are going on. Now I have this family that's saying, good, you're done now, you can finally stop playing, I have umpteen lists of jobs for you to do around the house, and oh, by the way, I got to find another career. Like, this is a lot on your shoulders. I don't want to go and send you home to bed now. Like, you're like, oh, no, I can't go. If we talk about this, and now you're like, made me so depressed here, I have to go home and lay in bed. Like, there's what I'm saying is there's a huge responsibility that I feel is being ignored in the sports community to help you. And it needs to be talked about, and you shouldn't be fending for yourselves in this. And so I think there's a call to action out of this whole thing that needs to happen. And in the meantime, like, what do you do? Like, how are you supported? Like, you go punch stuff where you can, you find, hopefully find some comrades that are going through the same thing and talk it out regularly. Like, you get help with the coming down off that training, that training history, and redirect it. There's some help for that. And there's so many things, and between, like, I'm sure you have a gazillion ideas yourself, both of you, like, but yeah, I kind of get worried for folks. I don't want anyone to tackle someone on the sidewalk or drive over them with their car. Like, I really don't. Like, nobody wants that. So,
nobody does.
Nobody want to be that person either who gets the tackle.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I felt it was super important to bring you two on here and continue these talks about, what do we do? How do we help the organizations? How do we help the athletes and former athletes, and how to transition into this next world? But that is all we have for today. And we'll be back to it, guys. So thank you so much for your guys' time. We look forward to the next episode. We'll talk a little bit more about this anger side. Thank you, guys.
Good luck and thanks a lot.